I'm Dave McDonald. I am the shock specialist for actually both cars, the 6 and 17 Cup cars. I was born in Ypsilanti, Michigan. I grew up in a small town between Ypsilanti and Michigan Speedway called Clinton, Michigan. I was born in a racing family. My grandfather owned midgets, sprint cars, Silver Crown cars, which back in those days they called them the Dirt Champ cars. He had a variety of drivers from Johnny Parsons, Mark Alderson, and probably my favorite, my uncle Jim Hettinger, drove those cars. So from an early age I was born into the lifestyle. I spent a lot of time with my Uncle Jim. When I was 5 years old, I toured all the dirt tracks in Pennsylvania with the Wing Midget Series. Not long after that, my uncle and my grandfather built a quarter midget for me. I started out racing and quickly ended up racing for the same gentleman that my uncle raced quarter midgets for, which we did very well. The guy was a genius. We won tons of races. We won many regionals. We won the Southern States Nationals, which got us a seat in the Grand Nationals. Unfortunately, at some point, our family decided that for monetary reasons, it really wasn't wise to maintain a racing lifestyle. So that 1979 Grand National race was my last race as a driver. From there, I spent most of my summers working at the body shop with my uncle and racing midgets on the weekends. I think about 1984 or 85, my parents divorced. My mom packed us kids up and we moved to Las Vegas. Eventually moved back to Michigan. I had trouble finding a job in racing that sustained a living. I continued to run a restaurant for a buddy of mine, where then I finally decided to get extreme, and I went and got a job with Competition Tire West, which is a Goodyear racing tire distributorship located at Michigan Speedway, and I busted tires for a couple of years. In that building, there was a Penske Racing Shocks distributorship. There were 3 guys working in there, and they used to call it 3.5 because I hung out there every spare minute I had. I learned how to build shocks. In those days, it was in the late 90s. Shocks were a bit of black magic. There wasn't too many guys that knew much about them. So I'd say I got into that specialty at the right time. They made me a national short track representative, where I toured with the ASA cars back then, Southwest Tour. I hung around with guys on the tour with like the Rodmans, Craig Rodman, Chris Rodman, and Mike Harvick, who's actually Kevin Harvick's father. We exchanged a lot of ideas, and I learned a lot from those guys. There was dampers were a manipulative tool back then, to where you could adjust aero platform in your car, and as we know today, aerodynamics, it trumps just about everything. And when you could walk into a racetrack with a set of shocks and pretty much guarantee guys that you were going to pick speed up, it made it easy to sell shocks. I became known as Penske Dave back in those times, but my true passion was still in midget and sprint car racing. My uncle was still driving midgets. They had decided to build a new car, and we had talked about speccing out a Penske shock for his car, which we did a little bit of testing, and ultimately won a whole bunch of races. We won the first 12 we entered, we won 9 of them. It really attracted a lot of attention of the big hitters in '98, and ironically enough, the biggest competitor at the time was a kid named Ryan Newman, which was quite ironic where we are today, but again, it was good times. At some point in that process, I remember talking to Bob East and saying, hey, you know, I hear the NASCAR guys are paying people like me to be shock specialists. I think I'm going to move to North Carolina. And he said, I think you should. And I sold about everything I had that I couldn't pack in my Mustang, and I drove to North Carolina. I started working in the Cup Series in 2000 with Bill Elliott on the McDonald's 94 car. That was Ford, by the way, and learned a lot, learned a ton there. At some point, a couple years later, I was approached by Robbie Reiser about becoming the shock specialist for the DeWalt car with Matt, of course, and actually went over the wall with, we were known as the Killer Bees back then, won a couple of Pit Crew of the Year awards, and won some pretty cool races. Won the Daytona 500 a couple of times. I always remember my favorite track when I was first in the series was Dover, and Matt was superior at Dover and won a couple of races there, and just had a lot of good years. It was a tough crowd. Everybody from the head guy down, Jack Roush, demanded excellence, and anything less than that was not acceptable back in those days. So it was a lot of hard work, but when the green dropped, you knew why you were involved with Roush Racing. After that, everybody knows Matt moved on. I was lucky enough to migrate to the 99 car with Carl Edwards. Carl was a great guy to work with, and we managed to win a few races with him. And then when Carl moved on, I went back to the 17 with Ricky and was able to win a couple races with him. It's been a good run at Roush Racing, and the future looks really good. Quite honestly, probably my favorite place to go to, and I think a few will agree, is Sonoma. I love Northern California. It's a nice area. You know, there's mixed reviews on road racing, how boring it is, but if you ever get up in the spotters hill of Sonoma and watch the cars snaking up through the hills and valleys, it's really something to see. It's really cool. Fortunately enough, ended up winning Sonoma with Carl, which made it that much sweeter. And looking forward to more road course racing that we're going to be doing, not just this year, but with the next gen car next year. There's a couple added road courses, it sounds like. I really enjoy it. Chris, for sure, is an awesome road course racer. You know, we've made some pretty good gains with both these cars on all the tracks, and I think there's some victories coming. Yeah, ironically enough, we have a new young man that's going to be starting here quickly. He's freshly graduated from Clemson, and they've asked that he work with me, and as far as mentoring guys in this company, it's my 17th season with Roush, so had a lot of different guys coming in and out of my department. I think when Thomas starts, he'll be my 7th person that I've taught how to build shocks. Most all of those guys have moved on to do some pretty good things. A couple of them are still shock guys. Some of them have moved on to be car chiefs, and they're all young, so they got pretty bright futures. It's nice to be able to teach a specialty to some guys that are not just young and passionate, but you know, we got mechanical engineers that are graduating at the top of their class, and with myself and not having an ounce of college education, it's kind of gratifying to show that you can actually teach somebody something they don't know already, and they value it, and they end up coming back to you later and having discussions with you about it, and then you turn out learning things from them as well. So yeah, there's always a mentorship. Jack has always brought guys up through the rankings from within. He's always been a believer of that. It's paid off many times. So being part of that program is